Hi, I'm Rivka. Welcome to OneShul's Monday night tour together. A PunkTorah production, of course. This week we're going to be doing the 14th portion, Vaera. What we're going to see is, first of all, we're going to see a brief overview of what's happened so far in this storyline. Then we're going to see the building up and establishment of the reputation and history of Aaron and Moses, primarily through their genealogy, which has led back to ideas in Gemara and whatnot, that one should look at the siblings of one's intended in order to see what kind of person they turn out to be, which is an interesting conclusion to draw from such a story. And then we're going to see the tale of the redemption start to progress, and we're going to see what happens when Aaron and Moses confront Pharaoh, and we're going to see a couple of the plagues. It's kind of a two-part story. So we'll go through and we'll read the summation and the genealogy, and then we'll kind of talk about the plagues a little bit before we start that. So Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Eternal. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name. And here we get the name, the Yahweh. Verse 4. I also established my covenant with them, to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. I have now heard the mourning of the Israelites because of the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to this Israelite people, I am the Eternal. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, the Eternal, am your God who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you unto the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I, the Eternal. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses, their spirits crushed by cruel bondage. So here we have Moses. And this is kind of, we've recapped it, and now we're seeing the full idea of Moses and what his role is going to be. So verse 10. The Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, Go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from this land. But Moses appealed to the Eternal, saying, The Israelites would not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me, a man of impeded speech? So the Eternal spoke to both Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. Alright, so now we've recapped what happened in the last week's portion. And in verse 14, we're going to go on and start talking about the genealogy and putting everything in context for the people at this time and building the reputation on which Moses, as he says, a man of impeded speech, will be able to stand upon his actions and his family's honor. So verse 14. The following are the heads of the respective clans. The son of Reuben's, Israel's firstborn, Enoch and Palu, Herzon and Kamari, those are the families of Reuben. The sons of Simeon. And it goes on, and it goes down to verse 18. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Ishar, Hebron, and Uzel. And the span of Kohath's life was 133 years. And this is important because later in the book of Numbers, we're going to see that these tribes change around, but the particular ones aren't really important, the names. The idea that each of the sons' lineage is what's putting them in their position and finalizing their right to the covenant, which is an interesting way to look at it. And this also mentions firstborns, but if we've looked back in past sections and even look into the future, but mostly in past sections, we'll see that it's not usually the firstborn that's picked. There's usually a reason why Hashem picks one of the other children for the blessing, just like Jacob over Esau. So in verse 20 it explains, I'm sorry, it goes on and it explains where Phineas and the Levites are. Verse 26 is really where we get back into the story and away from just lines. 26. It is the same Aaron and Moses to whom the Eternal One said, "Bring forth the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop." It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to free the Israelites from the Egyptians. These are the same Moses and Aaron. For when the Eternal spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, and the Eternal One said to Moses, "I am the Eternal, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you." Moses appealed to the Eternal, saying, "See, I am impeded speech." Repeated here again. "How then should Pharaoh heed me?" The Eternal replied to Moses, "See, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh, with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements. And the Egyptians shall know I am the Eternal, when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst." This Moses and Aaron did as the Eternal commanded them. So they did. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they made their demand on the Pharaoh. So this whole section here, chapter 26, or chapter 6, verse 26, through chapter 7, verse 7, recaps the recap. But the reason why it's important that it's continually repeating itself is that it's establishing multiple sides of the story, because we're probably having multiple people write this down, as it was first an oral tradition. And then we also have the idea that every time it's repeated is another point. See, there it is. See, there it is. See, there it is. This is why it's important. If it's mentioned, 10 times, it must be more important than the one thing mentioned one time. Verse 8. The Eternal One said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh speaks to you and says, 'Produce your marvel,' you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh. It shall turn into a serpent.' So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Eternal had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent. Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the wise ones and the sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians in turn did the same with their spells. Each cast down his rod and turned it into serpents, but Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. Yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Eternal had said." So we have this stage set up to where we're going to have the battle between the marvels, the sign from God in nature, versus what a magician can produce with his tricks for the Pharaoh. Verse 14. And the Eternal One said to Moses, "Pharaoh is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is coming out to the water, and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turned into a snake. and say to him, The Eternal, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to say to you, Let my people go, and they may worship me in the wilderness. But you have paid no heed until now. Thus says the Eternal, By this you shall know that I am eternal. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile with this rod that is in my hand, and it will be turned into blood, and the fish in the Nile will die. The Nile will stink so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile. So we're beginning the plagues. So we'll stop and talk about that. Miriam brings up a very interesting point. She said, the business of hardening Pharaoh's heart is interesting. It raises some questions about free will. Right. Is one thing Hashem promised us that we would have free will when he made Adam and Eve go out into the wilderness from the Garden of Eden? That's sort of the burden that's implied upon them, that they shall have to strive for their life and make their own decisions now. They're no longer innocent children. They have knowledge. So this brings up the idea that everyone is given free will, but Hashem is interfering with it. And why is he interfering with it? And in this case, it's to make the miracles known so that the Israelite people will come together. So this brings up even a broader question of, is there some sort of split in the mentality between what is God's position towards an Israelite and God's position towards any other? And can he or she or it or whatever affect one's free will? Or is it their suggestions? And what does the implications of seeing nature change so much in front of you, and how that might affect what you really feel about things? And I'd be interested to hear anybody else's opinion on that idea. That's a great idea. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Miriam. So, back to the plagues. So we're going to start to see the plagues. And you can see them as many different things. And one of the ways to look at them is sort of a mathematical way. You can group them in groups. And there's many different ways. There's a couple traditional ones. And one that I found that I liked the best was seeing the wonders as 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Plagues 1 and 2 deal with the Nile, and plagues 3 and 4 lice and insects, which resemble each other, as do pestilence and boils in 5 and 6. Hail and locusts in 7 and 8 are directed towards crops, and in the final plagues, darkness and death are alike. So we can group them by things that they resemble. And there's other interpretations, but I thought that was an interesting one to just start with, to see a sort of equality between things. Miriam's bringing up some great points. Maimonides says, sometimes man's offense is so grave that he forecloses the possibility of repentance. At first, Pharaoh sinned repeatedly of his own free will until he fortified the capacity to repent. She says it's notable that the first couple of times Pharaoh hardens his heart, and only when he gets to the last couple of plagues does God harden Pharaoh's heart. Miriam says she would connect it to the idea of habits being hard to break. He hardening his heart so many times that he lost the ability to change, to stop, to do something else. And that's a very good idea. Think about being in this position, being the ruler of Egyptians, and having a bias against the Israelites that we're already talking about in the past section, and how he's got the mindset that they must be controlled. They're a population that are dangerous. He's calling for destruction of the firstborn, which of course we'll see is retribution in one of the plagues later. But it's it's really an important lesson to learn from that Maimonides brought out well, is that having a closed heart, having a closed mind, and not looking at your surroundings, listening to nature, and exercising that free will, that knowledge, will cause more problems in one's life than not. Thus, Pharaoh and all the plagues. Verse 19. And the Eternal One said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and hold out your arm over the water of Egypt. Its rivers, its canals, its ponds, all its bodies of water, they that may turn to blood. There shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as the Eternal commanded. He lifted up the rod and struck the water in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and all the water in the Nile was turned into blood, and the fish in the Nile died. The Nile stank so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile, and there was blood throughout the land of Egypt. But when the Egyptian magicians did the same with their spells, Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Eternal had spoken. Pharaoh turned and went into his palace, paying no regard even to this. And all the Egyptians had to dig around the Nile for drinking water, because they could not drink the water of the Nile. When 7 days had passed after the Eternal struck the Nile, the Eternal One said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Eternal, let my people go, and that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, then I will plague your whole country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace, your bedchambers and your bed, the houses of your courtiers and your people, and your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and your people and all your courtiers. And the Eternal One said to Moses, say to Aaron, hold out your arm with the rod over the rivers, the canals, the ponds, and bring up the frogs on the land of Egypt. Aaron held out his arm over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same with their spells, and brought frogs upon the land of Egypt. So here we're having a repetition of the same thing happening again, and the magicians bucking against it, and making it harder for Aaron and Moses, and making it harder for Pharaoh to see things. Miriam brings up an interesting point about the plagues possibly being designed to show Egypt's gods. For example, the Nile was personified as a crocodile god, so the plagues connected with the Nile show the god of Israel to be stronger than the other gods of Egypt. Right. And what's really interesting in this is you have that connection between these two religions because they've been mixed in for so long. But you don't see this tradition in the plagues themselves really in Egyptian literature from the era, not that's been found. So it's interesting to see that it's kind of a new twist upon the stories that have come in the past, and an interesting retelling. And it may have been that these particular signs were chosen because they did affect the religion of the Egyptians, because they were in direct contrast to what the Eternal One was putting forth there, and we're going to see the struggle later in idol worship and whatnot. So it's at this point where we're starting to see the diversion between the two religions, basically based on ethnicity. So it's really important to bring up the idea of them, of these plagues being a reflection of Egyptian religion, and thinking about how that would affect not only what the Egyptians thought of what was going on, but of what the Israelites saw going on. Chapter 8, verse 4. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Plead with the Eternal One to remove the frogs from me and my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Eternal." And Moses said to Pharaoh, "You may have this triumph over me. For what time shall I plead in behalf of you and your courtiers and your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses to remain only in the Nile?" "For tomorrow," he replied. And Moses said, "As you say, that you may know that there is none like the Eternal our God. The frogs shall retreat from you and your courtiers and your people. They shall remain only in the Nile." Then Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moses cried out to the Eternal in the matter of the frogs, which had been inflicted upon Pharaoh. And the Eternal did as Moses asked. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. They piled them up in heaps till the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them, as the Eternal had spoken. So he's gone back and reneged on his agreement. Verse 12. Here we can see a different pattern arising, which is the 3-3-3-3-1 pattern that's more prevalent in traditional interpretation of the way the plagues are grouped. And this is more of the idea of cycles. Moses meeting Pharaoh in the open in the first plague. In this, in the second plague, he addresses himself to Pharaoh with a warning, and in each third plague, he proceeds without warning, because again, usually, especially in this instant, Pharaoh's heart has been hardened, and he reneges upon his deal. So therefore, the cycle starts again on the fourth plague, pointing out that 3 pattern. So, verse 12. Then the Eternal One said to Moses, "Say to Aaron, hold out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, and it shall turn to lice throughout the land of Egypt." And they did so. Aaron held out his arm with the rod and struck the dust of the earth, and vermin came up upon human and beast. All the dust of the earth turned to lice throughout the land of Egypt. The magicians did the like with their spells to produce lice, but they could not. The vermin remained upon human and beast, and the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not heed them, as the Eternal had spoken. And the Eternal One said to Moses, "Early in the morning present yourself to Pharaoh as he is coming out to the water, and say to him," so we start again the cycle, the plague 1 again, out in the public. "Thus says the Eternal, let my people go that they may worship me. For if you do not let my people go, I will let loose swarms of insects against you and your courtiers, and your people and your houses, and the houses of Egyptians, and the very ground they shall stand on shall be filled with swarms of insects. But on that day I will set apart the region of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of insects shall be there, that you may know that I, the Eternal, am in the midst of the land. And I will make a distinction between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall come to pass." And the Eternal did so. Heavy swarms of insects invaded Pharaoh's palace and the houses of his courtiers throughout the country of Egypt. The land was ruined because of the swarms of insects. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Go and sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses replied, "It would not be right to do this, for what we sacrifice to the Eternal our God is untouchable to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice that which is untouchable to the Egyptians before their very eyes, will they not stone us? So we must go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Eternal as our God may command us." Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to sacrifice to the Eternal your God in the wilderness, but do not go very far. Plead then for me." And Moses said, "When I leave your presence, I will plead with the Eternal that the swarms of insects depart tomorrow from Pharaoh and his courtiers and his people. But let not Pharaoh again act deceitfully, not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Eternal." Verse 26. So Moses left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Eternal, and the Eternal did as Moses asked, removing the swarms of insects from Pharaoh and his courtiers and his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh became stubborn this time also, and would not let the people go. And I really appreciate, stop real quick, and really appreciate all you guys in the chat room joining in, and you're bringing up such great ideas. Please stop me anytime and ask a question or bring up one of your great points. And thank you so much, Miriam, for pointing out where we're at. So, chapter 9. The Eternal One said to Moses, Go to Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Eternal, the God of the Hebrews, Let my people go to worship me. For if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, then the hand of the Eternal will strike your livestock in the fields. So here we have a slight shift, as we're going to the plagues are going to attack not people but property. The livestock in the fields, the horses, the asses, the camels, the cattle, and the sheep, with a very severe pestilence. But the Eternal will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of the Egyptians, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the Israelites. The Eternal has fixed the time, tomorrow. The Eternal will do this thing in the land. And the Eternal did so the next day. All the livestock of Egyptians died, but of the livestock of the Israelites not a beast died. When Pharaoh inquired, he found that not a head of the livestock of Israel had died, yet Pharaoh remained stubborn, and he would not let the people go. Then the Eternal One said to Moses and Aaron, Each of you take handfuls of soot from the kiln, and let Moses throw it towards the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become fine dust all over the land of Egypt, and cause an inflammation, breaking out in boils on human and beast throughout the land of Egypt. So they took soot of the kiln and appeared before Pharaoh. Moses threw it towards the sky, and it caused an inflammation, breaking out in boils on human and beast. The magicians were unable to confront Moses because of the inflammation, for the inflammation afflicted the magicians as well as all other Egyptians. But the Eternal stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, and he would not heed them, just as the Eternal had told Moses. Miriam's bringing up some good points about looking at the Egyptian culture again versus the Israelite religion that's being pushed out at this time, and what the different plagues are resembling. And if you have time sometime, you should really look into it. It's really interesting. We're going to finish this chapter, and then we'll close up for tonight. So verse 13. The Eternal One said to Moses, Early in the morning present yourself to Pharaoh, and say to him, Thus says the Eternal, the God of the Hebrews, Let my people go to worship me. Repetition again. For this time I will send all my plagues upon your person and your courtiers and your people, in order that you may know that there is none like me in all the world. I could have stretched forth my hand and stricken you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been effaced from the earth. Nevertheless, I have spared you for this purpose, in order to show you my power, and in order that my fame may resound throughout the world. Yet you continue to thwart my people, and do not let them go. This time tomorrow I will rain down a very heavy hail, such as has not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Therefore order your livestock and everything you have in the open brought under shelter. Every human and beast that is found outside, not having been brought indoors, shall perish when the hail comes down upon them. Those among Pharaoh's courtiers who feared the Eternal's word brought their slaves and livestock indoors to safety. But those who paid no regard to the word of the Eternal left their slaves and livestock in the open. We'll go ahead and finish. The Eternal One said to Moses, Hold out your arm towards the sky, that hail may fall on the land of Egypt, upon human and beast, and all the grasses of the field in the land of Egypt. So Moses held out his rod towards the sky, and the Eternal sent thunder and hail, and fire streamed down on the ground, as the Eternal rained down hail upon the land of Egypt. The hail was very heavy, fire flashing in the midst of the hail, such as had not fallen on the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout the land of Egypt the hail struck down all that were in the open, both human and beast. The hail also struck down all the grasses of the field and shattered all the trees of the field. Only in the region of Goshen, where the Israelites were, there was no hail. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron and said to them, I stand guilty this time. The Eternal is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Plead with the Eternal that there may be an end of God's thunder and of hail. I will let you go. You need not stay longer. Moses said to him, As I go out of the city, I shall spread out my hands to the Eternal. The thunder will cease, and the hail will fall no more, so that you may know that the earth is the Eternal's. But I know that you and your courtiers do not yet fear the Eternal God. Now the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was in the bud. But the wheat and the emmer were not hurt, for they ripened late. Leaving Pharaoh, Moses went outside the city and spread out his hands to the Eternal. The thunder and the hail ceased, and no rain came pouring down upon the earth. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he became stubborn and reverted to his guilty ways, as did his courtiers. So Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Eternal had foretold through Moses. And that's the end of this portion. So we'll pick up on the rest of the plagues, and maybe we'll look, see if we have some time to look a little more in depth into the Egyptian side of it, because it's really quite interesting. So, thank you so much for coming. I myself have to leave. You guys are welcome to continue discussing in the chat room. If you've enjoyed this, or if you've had any questions or concerns, you're welcome to contact me, Rivka@PunkTorah.org. I'm always happy to hear from you. In fact, I have a couple emails I do have to answer. If you've enjoyed this, please consider donating a little bit of money to PayPal. Even the poorest man, the man who lives upon charity, must give a little to learn. And this way it keeps these classes ad-free. It does cost money, and we do have to find it somewhere. If you have something else you want to contribute, or want to volunteer some of your time to help out and maybe do a class about this particular section, especially around the time of Passover, you could talk to Patrick at PunkTorah.org. He's always happy to hear from you and loves to have the community grow. So thank you so much for coming. I hope to see you again, and I hope your conversation continues in the chat room. You guys were so great tonight. Thanks so much for hanging out. And I hope everyone has a good and safe time until we meet again. Thank you.